Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the last chunk of notes in that green Reading Linear Equations packet. Yours actually doesn't say 9.6. Okay, and so where I want you to look is I want you to flip the page through till you find the section that says graph a linear equation given an equation. Okay, so up to this point you looked at a graph, you looked at a table, you looked at information and determined what the equation was. Now you're going to be given an equation and asked to graph it. Okay, so it feels like it would be difficult. It's really not. Once you've gone through the notes on and practiced identifying the slope and the y-intercept, looking at it on a line, once you've done all that prep work, this is actually the final part of it. So all of that prep work was leading us to this point. So it says examples. Graph the equations in slope-intercept form. Okay. So two things that we can find. We can find, or actually I don't want to say find the, I'm going to say determine the y-intercept. Whenever you graph, you need a starting point. No matter what you're graphing, if you were given a table of values that you turned into ordered pairs, you'd pick one to start with. Okay, we can do that with an equation. We're actually given a starting point. We're given an ordered pair just by looking at this equation. And that's this number. Our y-intercept is our starting point. Okay, so number one, determine the y-intercept. Okay, I want you to make a note of that on your paper. So determine the y-intercept, that's the first thing you do. That is our starting point. So determine the y-intercept and graph it. Okay, so that's step number one. Determine the y-intercept and graph it. Okay, so in our first problem, our y-intercept, and actually I've been making it blue, so let's stick with that. In our first order, or our first equation, our y-intercept is 0, 1. And so I'm going to go ahead and graph 0, 1. Okay. Now step number two is going to be to use the slope to find the next point. Okay, remember, our slope is just a rise and a run. It's basically the directions to get from one point to the next point. Okay, it's like you're trying to get to your friend's house and they can't cut through backyards, they can only use streets. So you tell them, go up 2 streets, make a right, go down 3 houses. Basically what's happening here. So that slope gives us the directions of where to go to find the next point. So in my first equation, my slope is a 2. So what that's telling me is my rise over run is 2 over 1. Remember, if there's no denominator, it's a 1. So my rise over run is 2 over 1. So I'm going to rise 2, run 1, and there's my next point. Take those 2 points, connect them, and actually let me make a better line there. Thicken that up a little bit. Let's try this again. Oh, that's horrible. Hold on. Sorry about this, guys. Now I'm determined to get the right size. That's much better. Okay. And we want arrows at the end. Whenever you're drawing these lines, you always want to put arrows at the end. The reason you do that is because the line doesn't stop where you made it stop. The line continues forever. If I wanted to continue this pattern, I'd rise 2, run 1, point. Rise 2, run 1, point. Rise 2, run 1, point. So this actually goes on forever and ever and ever. And I could continue this line. We don't necessarily need to do that. It's a little overkill. So the way that we deal with that is you just add your arrows to the ends. Okay. Let's take a look at the second one. My y-intercept is going to be -2. Remember, if I had added the opposite on this, I would end up with -2/3 x plus -2. So I'm going to plot -2. Now on your coordinate planes, if no numbers are marked, we can assume that your intervals are 1s, just so you know. So now our slope is -2/3. Okay, so I'm going to rise -2 or go down 2 and run 3. Remember, that's my rise over my run. Alternately, I could have looked at it as 2 over -3. So if I wanted to, I could have risen 2 and gone backwards 3. And something I want you to notice when I draw my line, do you see how with my line, even no matter which direction I went, my line passes through? So when you have a negative number, it doesn't matter if you assign it to the numerator or the denominator, but you've got to assign it to one of those. Not both, just one. Okay, you'll realize what you're more comfortable with, whether you like to go up and then backwards or down and then to the right. Okay, let's take a look at one more. This one's a little bit trickier. With this, if you struggle, I wouldn't stress over this. There are two ways you could handle this situation here. Our goal is to have this written in y equals mx plus b format. And right now it's not. Okay, so your first option is to start solving the equation, and your goal is to get the y isolated. We want that by itself. Okay, so basically solving two-step equation type situation is what we have here. So I would add 8 to both sides. That will make -8 plus 8 become 0. And I end up with 4y equals 2x plus 8. Now I'm closer to what I want, but I don't want 4y, I want 1y. So I've got to divide this y by 4, and then I've got to divide everything else by 4. If you remember back when we solved equations, if you want to divide something on each side, you divide everything. So I end up with y, because my 4's cancel, equals 1/2 x plus 2. Now from here it's pretty simple. My y-intercept is 0, 2. And then my slope is 1/2. So I rise 1, run 2, there's my point. Now on a side note, you do not need to draw the rise and the run. You can just eyeball, or, use your pencil to guide yourself. Do not feel like you have to draw that anymore. At this point, many of you will not find that necessary. Okay. Now your other option, let's say that on a test day or a quiz or whatever, this makes you nervous, the solving equation part. You're going to have to get over that. Next unit, you're going to need to be able to do this. However, test day comes, you get nervous, whatever happens, and you look at this and you don't know what to do. Okay. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to say, oh, the slope is 2 and the y-intercept is -8. Does not work that way. If it is not written in y equals mx plus b format, you can't use this easy setup down here where you just identify the y-intercept and the slope by looking. Because if you notice, the slope is not 2. The slope is 1/2. So, if you forget what to do, we're going to fall back on a table. And I'm going to tell you, pick an x, find your y. Okay, let's say, and let me fix this table really quick. I wanted to have room for work, but it's not going to happen. So let's pick an x, or pick a y, it doesn't matter, pick whatever you want. Because my y minus 4y minus 8 is on the left, let's just pick some y's. You'll see why I say that in a second. So let's say y is 0. If I substitute it, okay, then I'll get 0 minus 8, so -8 equals 2x, divide by 2, and x would equal -4. Okay, and then if I find a second point, as long as I have 2 points, I'm good. So you've got to have 2 points, minimum. 3 is better. The reason you'd want 3 is because if you have 2 points and one is wrong, you did some sort of mathematical error, you're going to think you're right and you're not. So 3 points is key. All you need to draw a line are 2 points. but you need 3 to make sure you're drawing a correct line. Okay, so let me be clear again. You only need 2 points to draw a line, but you need 3 points to draw a correct line. So let's take another point. Now, I'm going to choose an X this time. Okay, I'm going to erase my work. Now this, you don't need to copy this part down if you don't want to. It's up to you whether you copy this backup plan. This is plan B. Okay. So I'm going to pick 1 for X, so I get 4y minus 8 equals 2 times 1. Now the reason I told you it might be easier to choose your y's is because now you have a 2-step equation to solve. And to be quite honest, if you're down to solve a 2-step equation, you might as well have done plan A over here. Because all plan A is solving a 2-step equation. And life is a million times easier once you get y equals 1/2 x plus 2. Anyway, I'll divide each of these by 4, and I get y equals, if I simplify that, 5 over 2, or 2.5. Okay, so if x is 1, y is 2.5. That's horrendous. I may not even want to use that point, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to pick a y again. Let's say y is 1. Okay, 4 times 1 minus 8 equals 2x. I get 4 minus 8 equals 2x. 4 minus 8, if I add the opposite, I get negative 4 equals 2x. 2 divided by 2, and x equals negative 2. Alright, so now that I have my points, I'm going to graph these. I'll use green. So my first ordered pair is over negative 4 up 0, then over 1 up 2.5, and negative 2, 1. Now if you noticed, you see these 3 points I plotted, these green ones? Those are still on the same line. So I know we're correct, all of that. Now going back to you need 3 points to make a correct line. The reason I say that is, let's say you had a point sticking out here. You know there's a problem because there are no lines that we're drawing that look like this. That's a problem. That means one of these points is wrong. Okay? And you need to go back and double check your arithmetic. So be careful with those. Alright, so again, on a problem like this where you're not given an equation in y equals mx plus b format, you have 2 options. You can go with plan A over here, where you solve the equation and get it into y equals mx plus b form. Or if all else fails, you leave it the way it is, you pick a couple x's, and you end up with a y. Plot those points, you get your line. And that's it.